The tide remembers. Havenport smelled of salt and regret. Nora Hawthorne stepped off the bus, her boots crunching on the gravel lot, and inhaled the familiar sting of the sea. The air was heavy with it, laced with the faint rot of seaweed and the diesel hum of fishing boats bobbing in the harbor. 10 years had passed since she'd left this town, swearing never to return, yet here she was, dragged back by a phone call and a dying mother. The wind tugged at her scarf, and she pulled her coat tighter, as if it could shield her from more than the October chill. The bus hissed and pulled away, leaving her alone with her suitcase and the ghost she'd tried to outrun. Havenport hadn't changed much. The same weathered clapper houses lined the main road, their paint peeling like old skin. The lighthouse stood sentinel on the cliff, its beams slicing through the dusk, and beyond it, the Atlantic churned, restless and gray. Nora's eyes lingered on the water. She'd loved the sea once, back when it meant freedom, back when it meant him. She shook the thought away and started walking toward town. Her mother's house, her house now, she supposed, was a mile inland, past the bookstore she'd inherited and hadn't decided what to do with. Margaret Hawthorne was fading fast, the doctor had said. Cancer, aggressive, no time to waste. Nora hadn't cried when she heard. She hadn't cried in years. But her hands had trembled as she packed, and now they trembled again, gripping the suitcase handle. The streetlights flickered on as she reached the harbor, casting pools of amber over the docks. Fishermen hauled crates, their voices rough and carried by the wind. Nora kept her head down, hoping to slip through unnoticed. Havenport was small, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your sins. She wasn't ready for their pity, their questions about where she'd been, why she'd left. Not yet. Nora Hawthorne. The voice stopped her cold. Low, gravelly, laced with something she couldn't place. Surprise, maybe, or pain. She turned slowly, her heart lurching before her eyes caught up. He stood by a stack of lobster traps, his silhouette broad against the fading light. Flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands calloused and stained with engine grease. His hair was darker than she remembered, cropped shorter, but those eyes, storm blue, sharp as a blade, hadn't changed. Caleb Wilder. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The years fell away, and she was 18 again, laughing with him on the beach, his fingers tangled in her hair, his promises whispered against her skin. Then the memory sharpened, the empty bed, the unanswered calls, the silence that broke her. He'd left her without a word, and she'd spent a decade hating him for it. Caleb, she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. Didn't expect to see you here. He shifted, rubbing the back of his neck, a gesture so familiar it hurt. Didn't expect you either. Heard you were gone for good. Things change. She adjusted her grip on the suitcase, willing her hands to stop shaking. I'm just here for my mom. His face softened, but only for a second. I heard about Margaret. I'm sorry. Don't be. The words came out sharper than she meant, and she looked away toward the sea. It's not your grief to carry. He flinched, barely, but she caught it. Good. Let him feel something, even if it was just a fraction of what she'd carried all these years. Silence stretched between them, heavy as the tide. She wanted to ask why he'd left, why he'd let her believe he didn't care, but the words stuck in her throat. What was the point? Some wounds didn't heal, no matter how much you picked at them. You staying long? He asked finally, his voice softer now, almost cautious. Long enough. She met his eyes, forcing herself to hold his gaze. Then I'm gone again. He nodded like he'd expected it, but something flickered in his expression. Regret, maybe, or longing. Before she could decide, a smaller figure darted from behind the traps, all gangly limbs and wild curls. Daddy, can we go now? The girl couldn't have been more than 10, her jacket too big, her sneakers scuffed. She stopped short when she saw Nora, tilting her head. Who's this? Caleb's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he looked like he'd been caught in a lie. Lila, this is an old friend. Nora. Lila's eyes widened, bright and curious. Nora? Like the bookstore lady? Gran says you used to read stories better than anybody. Nora's throat tightened. She hadn't thought about the bookstore in years, hadn't thought about the kids who'd pile in for story hour, their faces lit with wonder. That was a long time ago, she said, managing a small smile for the girl's sake. I'm not sure I remember how. You'll remember, Lila said with a certainty only a child could muster. You should come by. Daddy's boat's right there. She pointed to a weather trawler moored nearby. It hull chipped but proud. Lila, Caleb said, a warning in his tone. Let's not keep Nora. She's got places to be. The girl pouted but didn't argue. Nora took the out, nodding curtly. Good to see you, Caleb. Take care of her. She didn't wait for a reply. Turning toward the road, her suitcase wheels rattling against the pavement. She felt his eyes on her as she walked away, felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing against her ribs. Havenport was too small, too suffocating. She'd do what she came to do. Say goodbye to her mother, sell the bookstore, settle the estate, and then she'd leave. For good this time. No looking back. But as she passed the harbor's edge, the sea whispered her secrets, and Nora couldn't shake the feeling that some promises, like some loves, didn't break. They just sank, waiting for the tide to drag them back to shore. Nora reached her mother's house as the last light bled from the sky. The old Victorian loomed against the pines, its shutters sagging, its porch creaking under her weight. Inside, it smelled of dust and medicine, a far cry from the warmth it once held. Her mother lay in a hospital bed in the living room, a husk of the woman who'd raised her. Margaret's eyes fluttered open, clouded but sharp enough to pin Nora in place. You came, Margaret whispered, her voice a rasp. I came, Nora said, setting her suitcase down. She didn't say the rest, that she hadn't wanted to, that she'd almost thrown the phone across the room when the doctor called. Instead, she took her mother's hand, thin and cold as paper, and sat beside her. There's things I need to tell you, Margaret said, each word a struggle. About your father. About the Wilders. Nora stiffened. Not now, Mom. You need to rest. No time. Margaret's grip tightened, surprising Nora with its strength. You need to know before it's too late. Nora wanted to pull away, to run from whatever truth her mother was clawing toward. But she stayed because running hadn't saved her before, and because something in Margaret's eyes, fear, maybe, or guilt, told her this was a secret that wouldn't stay buried much longer. Echoes on the water. The next morning, Nora woke to the sound of gulls and the faint clatter of dishes downstairs. For a moment, she forgot where she was, her mind clinging to the softness of a dream she couldn't recall. Then the ache in her neck reminded her, the lumpy couch, the hospital bed humming in the living room, her mother's labored breathing. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and glanced at the clock. 6:30. Too early for grief, but was already here, seeping through the cracks of the old house. She patted downstairs in her socks, the wood cold against her feet. A nurse, Ellen, she'd said her name was, stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. She was older, her hair streaked with gray, her hands steady in a way that spoke of years tending to the dying. Morning, Ellen said, not looking up. She's awake, if you want to sit with her. Nora nodded, though the thought tightened her chest. She took the coffee Ellen offered, the warmth seeping into her palms, and stepped into the living room. Margaret lay propped against pillows, her skin translucent in the dawn light filtering through the curtains. Her eyes tracked Nora as she approached, sharp despite the exhaustion pulling at her features. You look like him, Margaret said, her voice a thread. Your father. Same, stubborn jaw. Nora forced a smile, settling into the chair beside the bed. You always said that. Never knew if it was a compliment. It was. Margaret's lips twitched, a ghost of a laugh. He was a good man, Nora. Too good for this town. The words hung there, heavy with something Nora couldn't grasp. She sipped her coffee, letting the bitterness ground her. You said something last night. About Dad. The Wilders. Margaret's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Nora thought she'd retreat into silence. But then her mother reached for the bedside table, her trembling hand brushing a small wooden box Nora hadn't noticed before. Open it. Later. When I'm gone. Mom, Nora started, but Margaret cut her off with a look. Not now. Just promise me. Nora swallowed, the protest rising in her throat. Okay, I promise. Margaret nodded, satisfied, and sank back into the pillows. Her breathing slowed, and soon she drifted into a fitful sleep. Nora watched her for a while, the rise and fall of her chest a fragile rhythm, then stood. She needed air, needed to escape the weight of this house before it crushed her. The harbor was quieter in the morning, the boats still tethered to their moorings, the water glassy under a pale sky. Nora walked the docks, her hands stuffed to her coat pockets, the coffee still warming her from the inside. She hadn't planned to come here, but her feet knew the way, tracing paths she'd walked a lifetime ago. She stopped at the edge of the pier, staring out at the horizon. The sea was calm today, deceptive in its stillness. She remembered the summer she turned 18, the way it had roared then, wild and alive. She and Caleb had spent hours on his father's boat, a rickety thing called the Gull, laughing as the waves tossed them, kissing until their lips were salty and raw. He'd promised her forever that summer, and she believed him. Fool that she was. "You're up early." His voice jolted her back to the present. She turned, and there he was again, stepping off the Gull. Not the same boat, she realized, but a newer one, its hull patched but sturdy. He carried a coil of rope over his shoulder, his boots thudding against the dock. "Couldn't sleep," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "You never do." He set the rope down, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Lila's with her grand today. Gives me time to work." Nora nodded, unsure what to say. The silence between them was a living thing, pulsing with everything they weren't saying. She should have walked away, kept her distance, but her feet stayed rooted. "Still fixing boats?" she asked, nodding toward the Gull. "Some things don't change." He hesitated, then added, "She's mine now. Bought her off old man Reese a few years back." "Yours?" Nora raised an eyebrow. "Thought you hated fishing." "I did. Still do, sometimes." He gave a half smile, the kind that used to melt her. "But it's steady. Keeps Lila fed." The mention of his daughter softened something in her, despite herself. "She's sweet. Looks like you." "Yeah." He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hope she doesn't inherit my luck." Nora wanted to ask what he meant, but the sound of tires crunching gravel interrupted her. A black SUV rolled into the lot, its windows tinted, its engine idling too long. Caleb's posture shifted, shoulders stiffening, jaw clenching, and Nora felt a prickle of unease. "Friend of yours?" she asked, keeping her voice light. "No." The word was clipped, final. He stepped closer to her, almost instinctively, like he was shielding her from whatever was in that car. "You should go, Nora." "Why?" She crossed her arms, stubbornness flaring. "What's going on?" "Nothing you need to worry about." His tone was firm, but his eyes betrayed him. Fear, raw and unguarded, flashed there for a split second. Before she could press him, the SUV's door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, lean, with a face carved from stone and a coat too expensive for Havenport. He didn't look at Nora, his gaze fixed on Caleb. "Wilder," the man said, his voice smooth as oil. "We need to talk." Caleb didn't move, but Nora felt the tension radiating off him. "Not now, Victor." Victor smiled, thin and cold. "Now's perfect. Unless you'd rather I come back when the kid's around." Nora's stomach twisted. She didn't know who this man was, but she knew a threat when she heard one. Caleb's hands balled into fists, and for a moment she thought he might lunge. Instead, he turned to her, his voice low. "Go, Nora. Please." She wanted to argue, to demand answers, but something in his eyes, pleading, desperate, stopped her. She nodded once, sharp, and walked away, her boots echoing on the dock. She didn't look back, but she felt Victor's presence like a shadow and Caleb's silence like a wound. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She sat on a couch, the wooden box from her mother's bedside in her lap, its lid still closed. She traced its edges, the carvings worn smooth by time, and thought of Caleb. The boy she'd loved had been reckless, bright, full of dreams. The man she'd seen today was something else, haunted, tethered to something dark. And Lila. God, that girl deserved better than whatever mess Caleb was in. She thought of the summer it all fell apart. The memory came unbidden, sharp as a blade. Asterisk July, 2013. Havenport Beach. Asterisk. The bonfire crackled, spitting embers into the night sky. Nora leaned against Caleb, her head on his shoulder, the warmth of him seeping through her thin sweater. The beach was alive with their friends. Laughter, beer cans clinking, the thrum of the guitar someone had brought. But for Nora, it was just the two of them, the world shrinking to the space where their bodies touched. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked, her voice soft under the waves. "All the time." He tipped his head back, staring at the stars. "Take the Gull, sail south. Mexico, maybe. Just you and me." She smiled, pressing a kiss to his jaw. "What about school?" My books? Bring him. We'll read on the deck. I'll fish, you'll recite poetry. Perfect life. Perfect, she echoed, believing it. She'd gotten into college, English lit, a scholarship to a school 3 states away, but the thought of leaving him twisted her up inside. Promise you'll come with me, even if it's not Mexico. He turned to her, his eyes fierce in the firelight. Promise. They kissed then, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that felt like a vow. Later, they slipped away from the fire, down to the water's edge, where the sand was cool and the tide licked their bare feet. He pulled her close, and they danced, no music but the sea, her laughter mingling with his whispers. 2 weeks later, he was gone. No goodbye. Just an empty space where he'd been. Nora blinked, the memory fading into the dim light of the living room. Her mother stirred in her sleep, a low moan escaping her lips. Nora set the box aside and went to her, adjusting the blanket, smoothing her hair. Margaret's eyes opened, glassy and unfocused. He didn't mean it, she murmured. Caleb, he didn't want to go. Nora froze. What? But Margaret's eyes closed again, her breathing evening out. Nora stood there, heart pounding, questions clawing at her. What did her mother know? What had Caleb hidden all those years ago? She glanced at the box, its secrets locked tight. Tomorrow she'd open it. Tomorrow she'd find him again, demand the truth. Because whatever he was running from now, whatever had brought that man to the docks, it was tied to her, to them, to the past she couldn't escape. The sea outside whispered on, and Nora knew it remembered everything. Splinters of truth. The bookstore smelled of paper and time, a scent Nora hadn't realized she'd missed until she pushed open the door. Havenport books hadn't changed much in a decade. Sagging shelves, mismatched armchairs, a coffee pot that never quite worked right. Dust motes danced in the sunlight slanting through the windows, and for a moment, she was 16 again, curled up in the corner with a novel, dreaming of worlds beyond the sea. She'd come here to escape the house, to clear her head after another sleepless night. Margaret's words, asterisk Caleb didn't want to go asterisk, had burrowed into her, sharp and relentless. The wooden box sat unopened on the kitchen table when she left, its weight heavier than it should have been. She wasn't ready to face whatever was inside, not yet. But the bookstore, with its quiet chaos, felt like a safer place to think. The bell above the door jingled, and Nora tensed, half expecting Caleb. Instead, a smaller figure slipped inside, her sneakers squeaking on hardwood. Lila Wilder, her curls tied back with a red scrunchie, clutched a library book to her chest. Hey, Lila said, spotting Nora behind the counter. Gran said you might be here. Nora raised an eyebrow, setting down the inventory list she'd been pretending to read. Did she now? What's up? Lila shuffled closer, her eyes bright with purpose. I finished The Secret Garden. Gran says you used to have the best books for kids. I thought maybe you could pick one for me. Nora's chest tightened. She hadn't done story hour in years, hadn't thought about the kids who'd crowd around her, hanging on every word. But Lila's hopeful expression was hard to resist. Sure, she said, stepping around the counter. Any favorites? Magic, Lila said instantly. Or adventures? Something with a girl who's brave. Nora smiled, a real one this time. I've got just the thing. She led Lila to a shelf near the back, her fingers brushing spines until she found it, a worn copy of The Lion, The Witch and the Wardrobe. Lucy's about your age in this one. Braver than most grown-ups. Lila's face lit up as she took the book, flipping through its pages. Can I read it here? Just for a bit? Go for it. Pick any chair. Nora nodded toward the armchairs, her heart softening. Lila reminded her of herself at that age, curious, a little lost, hungry for stories to make sense of the world. As Lila settled in, Nora busied herself sorting books, stealing glances at the girl. She looked like Caleb, the same sharp cheekbones, the same thoughtful tilt to her mouth, but there was something else, something Nora couldn't place. A resilience, maybe forged by whatever life she and Caleb had been living. The bell jingled again, and this time it was him. Caleb stepped inside, his flannel shirt damp from the morning mist, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Lila. Relief softened his features, but when he saw Nora, his expression shifted, guarded, like he'd been caught somewhere he shouldn't be. Daddy, Lila waved, holding up the book. Look what Nora gave me. Caleb's gaze flicked to Nora, and she felt it like a touch. "Hey, kiddo," he said, crossing the room to ruffle Lila's hair. "You're supposed to tell Gran where you're going." "I forgot," Lila said, unapologetic. "It's the bookstore." "It's safe." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He turned to Nora, his voice low. "Thanks for keeping an eye on her." "She's no trouble," Nora said, leaning against the counter. "Better company than most." He almost smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Still, I owe you. You don't owe me anything." The words came out sharper than she meant, and Lila glanced up, sensing the shift. Nora softened her tone. "She's welcome here any time." Caleb nodded, but his attention drifted to the window, his posture stiffening. Nora followed his gaze. The black SUV from yesterday was parked across the street, its engine off, its windows dark. Her stomach twisted. "Caleb," she said quietly, stepping closer so Lila wouldn't hear. "Who were those people?" He didn't look at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nobody you need to know." "Stop it." Her frustration flared, low and fierce. "You don't get to do that. Not after yesterday. Not after." She cut herself off, the weight of their past pressing against her ribs. He turned to her then, his eyes stormy, conflicted. "Nora, please. Just stay out of it." "Why?" She crossed her arms, refusing to back down. "What are you hiding?" For a moment, she thought he might tell her. His lips parted, his hands flexing like he was grappling with something too heavy to hold. But then Lila's voice broke through, bright and oblivious. "Daddy, can Nora come to the dock later? You're fixing the boat, right? She could read to me while you work." Caleb's expression shuddered, and he forced a smile for his daughter's sake. "Maybe another time, kiddo. We've got a lot to do today." Lila pouted, but didn't push. Nora, though, wasn't ready to let it go. "I'll come," she said, meeting Caleb's eyes, daring him to argue. "I've got nothing else going on." He held her gaze, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "Fine," he said, finally the word clipped. "Around 3. Don't be late." The dock was alive with the rhythm of work, hammers clanging, ropes creaking, the low hum of engines warming up. Nora arrived with the lion, the witch, and the wardrobe tucked under her arm, her boots crunching on the gravel. Caleb's boat, the Gull, bobbed gently at its mooring, its deck cluttered with tools and paint cans. He was sanding a section of the rail, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat, his focus absolute. Lila spotted her first, waving from a crate where she sat with a juice box. "Nora, you came." "Told you I would." Nora smiled, settling beside her. "Ready for Narnia?" Lila nodded eagerly, and Nora opened the book, her voice slipping into the familiar cadence of storytelling. As she read about Lucy's first steps through the wardrobe, she felt Caleb's presence nearby, his movements slowing as he listened. She didn't look at him, but she could sense him, the weight of his attention, the pull of something unspoken. Halfway through the chapter, Lila interrupted, her voice thoughtful. "Do you think people can go back? Like, to a place they loved, even if it's different now?" Nora paused, the question cutting deeper than Lila could know. "Sometimes," she said carefully. "But it's never quite the same. You carry too much with you." Lila nodded, like she understood more than a 10-year-old should. Caleb set down his sander, wiping his hands on a rag, and joined them on the crate. "What's this about going back?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes searching. "Nothing," Lila said, shrugging. "Just thinking." He ruffled her hair, but his gaze lingered on Nora, heavy with questions neither of them dared ask. The moment stretched, fragile and charged, until a shadow fell across the dock. Victor, the man from the SUV, stood at the edge of the pier, his coat flapping in the wind. He didn't approach, but his presence was enough to make Caleb stiffen, his hand dropping to Lila's shoulder like a shield. "Stay here," Caleb muttered, standing. He crossed the dock in long strides, his voice low as he spoke to Victor. Nora couldn't hear the words, but the tension in Caleb's posture told her enough. Victor's smile was all teeth, his gesture sharp, controlled. Lila didn't seem to notice, her attention back on the book, but Nora's pulse quickened. She kept reading, her voice steady for Lila's sake, but her eyes flicked to Caleb. Victor handed him something, a small envelope, and clapped him on the shoulder before walking away. Caleb stood there a moment, staring at the envelope like it burned, then shoved it into his pocket and returned. "Everything okay?" Nora asked, keeping her tone casual. Fine, he said, too quick, too tight. He picked up his sander, but his hands weren't steady anymore. She wanted to push, to demand answers, but Lila's presence stopped her. Instead, she finished the chapter, her voice softening as Lucy met Mr. Tumnus. When she closed the book, Lila was beaming, but Caleb was distant, his eyes on the horizon. Time to head home, kiddo, he said, helping Lila to her feet. Say thanks to Nora. Thanks, Nora. Lila hugged her, quick and fierce, then scampered toward the truck. Caleb lingered, his hands in his pockets, the envelope hidden but not forgotten. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. The reading, the bookstore. Lila, she gets attached. Maybe I want her to. Nora stood, brushing off her jeans. She's a good kid, Caleb. And I'm not the one who runs. The words hit like a slap, and she saw it in his face, pain, raw and unguarded. For a moment, she thought he'd fight back, but he just nodded, like he deserved it. See you around, he said, and walked away, leaving her alone with the sea and the ache of everything unsaid. That night, Nora couldn't avoid the box any longer. She sat at the kitchen table, the house quiet except for Margaret's uneven breathing in the next room. The box was heavier than it looked, its carvings intricate, waves and vines, a story etched in wood. She opened it slowly, half expecting it to be empty. Inside was a bundle of letters, yellowed and tied with twine, and a single photograph. She picked up the photo first, her breath catching. It was her father, younger than she'd ever seen him, standing on the docks with another man, tall, broad-shouldered, with Caleb's eyes. Caleb's father, she realized. They were laughing, nets slung over their shoulders, the sea stretching behind them. She set the photo down and untied the letters, her fingers trembling. The first one was addressed to her mother, the handwriting tight, urgent. She skimmed it, her heart pounding as the words sank in. Asterisk Margaret, I didn't mean for it to happen. It was an accident, I swear. But they'll come for us now, for me, for you, for the kids. I'm taking Caleb and leaving. Don't tell Eleanor. She can't know what I did to her uncle. Keep her safe. Asterisk. It was signed Tom Wilder. Nora's vision blurred, the letters slipping from her hands. Her uncle, her father's brother, who died when she was a kid, a fishing accident, everyone said. But this wasn't an accident. Caleb's father had killed him, and her mother had known. All this time she'd known. She pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Caleb hadn't just left her that summer. He'd been running, dragged away by his father's sins. And now, whatever he was tangled in with Victor, it was tied to this, to their families, to the blood and secrets that bound them. The sea outside roared, and Nora knew she couldn't stay silent anymore. Tomorrow she'd find him. Tomorrow she'd demand the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The anchor breaks. The rain came sudden and hard, a gray curtain sweeping over Havenport as Nora marched toward the docks. The letter from Tom Wilder was folded in her coat pocket, its edges worn from her restless fingers. She'd barely slept, the words looping through her mind. Asterisk, she can't know what I did to her uncle, asterisk. Each one a splinter driving deeper. Her mother's silence, Caleb's disappearance, the years she'd spent hating him, all of it rooted in a truth she'd never seen coming. The harbor was a blur of mist and motion, boats rocking against their moorings, fishermen shouting over the storm. Nora's boots splashed through puddles, her hair plastered to her face, but she didn't stop until she reached the gull. Caleb was there, tying down a tarp, his movements quick and practiced. He didn't see her at first, his focus on the boat, but when she called his name, sharp against the wind, he froze. Nora! He straightened, squinting through the rain. What the hell are you doing out here? She didn't answer, closing the distance between them in 3 strides. Her hand shook as she pulled the letter from her pocket, holding it out like a weapon. Explain this. He stared at it, recognition flickering in his eyes, followed by something darker, dread, maybe, or resignation. The rain soaked the paper, ink bleeding at the edges, but he didn't take it. Where'd you get that? My mother's box. She kept it all these years. Nora's voice cracked, anger and hurt spilling over. Your dad killed my uncle, Caleb. And you knew. You left because of it, didn't you? He flinched, the sound of the rain swallowing whatever he might have said. For a moment, he just stood there, water streaming down his face, his silence louder than the storm. Then he grabbed her arm, gentle but firm, and pulled her under the boat's awning, out of the downpour. Not here, he said, his voice low, urgent. Not like this. Then how? She yanked her arm free, stepping back. You owe me the truth, Caleb. After everything, after you let me think you didn't care, you owe me that much. He ran a hand through his wet hair, his eyes darting to the docks, then back to her. I didn't want to leave you, Nora. I never did. Then why? She hated how small her voice sounded, how much it still hurt. Why didn't you tell me? Because I couldn't. He stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold. That summer, God, it was a mess. Dad came home one night, blood on his hands, shaking like I'd never seen him. Said he'd gotten into something bad, something with Victor's people. Your uncle was there, working the docks with him. It went wrong, a fight, a knife, and Dad, he didn't mean to, but he did it. Killed him. Nora's knees buckled, and she gripped the rail to steady herself. She'd been 8 when her uncle died, too young to question the story of a fishing accident. Her father had mourned, her mother had shut down, and she'd never known why. Now it clicked into place, a jagged piece of a puzzle she hadn't wanted to solve. Dad told me we had to go. Caleb continued, his voice rough. Said Victor's crew would come for us, for you too, if they knew we were tied to it. He dragged me out of bed that night, put me in the truck, and we were gone by dawn. I wanted to call you, Nora. I tried, but he smashed my phone, said it wasn't safe. I was 18, scared out of my mind. I didn't know what else to do. She stared at him, rain dripping from her lashes, her chest tight with too many feelings. Rage, grief, a flicker of pity she didn't want to feel. You could have come back. After it's settled. You could have found me. I did. His voice broke, and he looked away toward the sea. 2 years later, I tracked you down at that college. Saw you on the quad, laughing with some guy, books under your arm. You looked happy, free. I didn't have anything to offer you but ghosts, so I walked away. The confession hit her like a wave, knocking the air from her lungs. She remembered that day, junior year, a crisp fall afternoon, joking with a friend about a poetry reading. She'd been rebuilding herself, piece by piece, and he'd been there, watching, letting her go again. You don't get to decide that for me, she said, her voice trembling. You don't get to choose what I can handle. I know. He met her eyes, his own raw with regret. I've been paying for it ever since. She wanted to scream, to hit him, to erase the years of pain between them. But the rain was cold, and he was close, and all she could do was step forward, her hands fisting in his shirt. You broke me, Caleb. You broke us. I'm sorry, he whispered, his forehead resting against hers, water mingling between them. I'm so damn sorry. She didn't know who moved first, him or her. But suddenly they were kissing, fierce and desperate, like they could claw back everything they'd lost. His hands cupped her face, hers tangled in his hair, and for a moment, the storm didn't exist, only the heat of him, the salt on his lips. It was a mistake, she knew it, but it felt like breathing after years underwater. They broke apart, gasping, and reality crashed back. The docks, the rain, the letter limp in her hand. Caleb's chest heaved, his eyes searching hers, but before he could speak, a shout cut through the noise. Wilder! Victor stood at the end of the dock, flanked by 2 men, their coats slick with rain. Caleb tensed, pushing Nora behind him. Stay back, he muttered, then stepped out from the awning, his shoulders squared. Victor's smile was a blade. Bad time for company, huh? Thought we had an understanding. We do, Caleb said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I'll get it done. See that you do. Victor's eyes flicked to Nora, lingering too long. Wouldn't want complications. Caleb didn't respond, but his posture screamed warning. Victor chuckled, low and dark, and turned away, his men following. The threat hung in the air, thick as the fog rolling in. Nora grabbed Caleb's arm as soon as they were gone. What was that? What do they want? He shook his head, pulling free. Nothing you can fix. Stop shutting me out. She stepped in front of him, rain streaming down her face. If this is tied to what happened back then, I deserve to know. He looked at her, torn, then sighed, the fight draining out of him. It's the same mess, just bigger. Dad owed them, Victor's syndicate, for a deal that went south. The night he killed your uncle, he was supposed to deliver something, money or goods, I don't know. He didn't, and they've been collecting ever since. When he died 5 years ago, it fell to me. Nora's stomach churned. Collecting what? Everything. His voice was bitter. I fish, I pay, I keep Lila safe. That envelope yesterday? Another deadline. They don't care how I get it, just that I do. She stared at him, the pieces falling into place, his exhaustion, his fear, the way he'd shielded her from Victor. How much? Too much. He rubbed his face, water dripping from his fingers. I'm drowning, Nora. Have been for years. She wanted to fix it, to pull him out of the hole he'd been buried in, but she didn't know how. Instead, she took his hand, her fingers threading through his, cold and trembling. You don't have to do it alone. He looked at her, something breaking in his expression, hope, maybe, or just the weight of her words. You don't know what you're signing up for. I don't care. She squeezed his hand, fierce and sure. I'm here now. We figure it out together. He didn't argue, just pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like she was the anchor he'd lost. The rain battered them, but they stood there, holding on, two broken things trying to fit their pieces back together. That night, Nora sat by her mother's bed, the house quiet except for the storm outside. Margaret's breathing was shallower now, each inhale a struggle. Nora held her hand, the wooden box open beside her, its letters scattered like leaves. Why didn't you tell me? Nora whispered, though she knew Margaret couldn't answer. All those years, you let me hate him. Margaret stirred, her eyes fluttering open, cloudy but piercing. To keep you safe, she rasped. Tom begged me, said they'd come for you too. They're still coming, Nora said, her voice cracking. For Caleb. For Lila. Margaret's grip tightened, frail but desperate. Help him. He's good like your father was. The words sank into Nora, heavy and true. She nodded, tears burning her eyes. I will. Margaret's hand went slack, her breathing slowing to a stop. Nora sat there, frozen, as the storm raged on, her mother's last wish echoing in silence. The next morning, Nora found Caleb at the bookstore, Lila in tow. He looked wrecked, eyes red, shoulders slumped, but he managed a small smile when he saw her. She wanted to see you, he said, nodding at Lila, who held a drawing of a lion labeled Aslan. Wouldn't take no for an answer. Nora knelt, taking the drawing. It's perfect, Lila. You're an artist. Lila beamed, then glanced at her father. Can we stay? Just a little. Caleb hesitated, but Nora answered for him. Stay as long as you want. They spent the morning together, Lila reading, Nora and Caleb sorting shelves, stealing glances that felt like promises. But the envelope in his pocket loomed, a ticking clock they couldn't ignore. Nora didn't know how to save him, not yet, but she knew she wouldn't let him go again. Outside, the rain stopped, and the sea lay still, waiting for the next storm to break it apart. Timbers and tides. The funeral was small, quiet, the way Margaret would have wanted it. A handful of Havenport locals gathered under a gray sky, their murmurs lost to the wind off the cliffs. Nora stood by the grave, her coat too thin for the October chill, the wooden box tucked under her arm. She'd kept it close since her mother's last breath, a tether to the secrets that had unraveled her life. The letters were back at the house, locked in a drawer, but their weight lingered, pressing against her ribs. Ellen, the nurse, squeezed her shoulder as the minister finished his prayer. She was proud of you, you know. Talked about you all the time. Nora nodded, her throat tight. Thanks for everything, Ellen. The crowd thinned, leaving her alone with the headstone, * Margaret Hawthorne, beloved mother star. She traced the letters, her fingers cold, and whispered, I'm trying, Mom. I hope it's enough. She didn't cry. She hadn't since that night, as if her tears had dried up with the rain. But the ache was there, deep and steady, a companion she'd carry now. She turned from the grave and walked toward the harbor, needing the sea's noise to drown out her thoughts. Caleb found her an hour later, sitting on a bench by the docks, staring at the gull. He carried a thermos and 2 mugs, his boots scuffing the gravel as he approached. Lila trailed behind, kicking a pebble, her face bright despite the gloom. Thought you might need this, Caleb said, pouring coffee into a mug and handing it to her. Lila's idea? Nora took it, the warmth seeping into her hands. Thanks, both of you. Lila plopped beside her, swinging her legs. Funerals are sad. Gran says they're for saying goodbye, but I think they're dumb if you don't get to say it right. Nora managed a small smile. You're not wrong. I didn't get to say much either. Caleb sat on her other side, his shoulder brushing hers, a quiet anchor. "How you holding up?" "I'm here," she said, sipping the coffee. It was strong, bitter, the way she liked it. "That's something. It's a lot." His voice was soft, steady, and she felt it in her bones, his presence, his care. She leaned into him, just enough to feel real, and he didn't pull away. Lila hopped up, restless. "Can we fix the boat now, Daddy?" "You promised." Caleb glanced at Nora, a question in his eyes. She nodded, setting the mug down. "Let's do it. I could use the distraction." The afternoon unfolded on the Gull, a fragile bubble of peace amid the storm of their lives. Caleb hauled out tools, a sander, a can of varnish, a stack of planks he'd scavenged from a wrecked skiff. Nora rolled up her sleeves, her hands steady despite the exhaustion tugging at her. Lila darted between them, fetching screws or holding boards, her chatter filling the silence. They worked on the deck first, replacing a rotted section near the stern. Caleb showed Nora how to measure and cut, his hands guiding hers on the saw, their fingers brushing in a way that sent heat up her spine. She caught his eye once, saw the flicker of something, want, maybe, or memory, and looked away, focusing on the wood. "Like this?" she asked, fitting a plank into place. "Perfect," he said, his voice rougher than usual. He hammered it down, the rhythm steady, and she handed him nails, their movements syncing like they'd done this 100 times. Lila painted the rail, her tongue poking out as she concentrated. "We should name her something new," she said, brushing red over chipped white. Asterisk the Gull asterisk sounds old. "What's wrong with old?" Caleb teased, but his eyes were on Nora, warm and searching. "Nothing," Lila said, "but she's ours now. Needs a story." Nora paused, a nail between her fingers. "What about the tide?" "Short, simple. Like it's always moving." Lila grinned. "I like it." "Daddy?" Caleb nodded, his gaze still on Nora. Asterisk the tide asterisk it is. They worked through the afternoon, the boat taking shape under their hands. Nora sanded a bench, her arms aching but her mind quiet, the grief easing just enough to breathe. Caleb varnished beside her, his shoulder close, his quiet hum of an old sea shanty threading through the air. Lila sang along, off-key and fearless, and for a moment, Nora let herself imagine it. A life like this, the three of them, the sea stretching ahead. The sun dipped low, painting the water gold, and they stepped back to admire their work. The tide gleamed, patched but proud, a testament to their hands and their hours. Caleb slung an arm around Lila, pulling her close, and Nora felt a pang, not jealousy, but longing sharp and sweet. "Looks good," he said, his voice soft. "Better than I thought." "It's more than good," Nora replied, meeting his eyes. "It's ours." He held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them, and then Lila tugged his sleeve. "Can we take her out?" "Just a little." Caleb hesitated, glancing at the horizon, then at Nora. "Short trip. You in?" She nodded, her heart lifting despite the weight she carried. "I'm in." The engine sputtered to life, and the tide cut through the harbor, the shore shrinking behind them. Lila stood at the bow, her arms outstretched like a bird, laughing as the wind whipped her curls. Nora leaned against the rail, the spray cold on her face, and Caleb steered, his hands sure on the wheel. "Feels like old times," he said, loud enough for her to hear over the engine. She turned to him, the memory of their teenage summers. Asterisk the Gull asterisk, the waves, their promises, rising sharp and clear. "Almost," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "But better." He smiled back, real and unguarded, and for a heartbeat, she believed they could outrun it all, the past, the syndicate, the ghosts. They anchored just beyond the breakwater, the boat rocking gently, and Lila curled up with a blanket, her eyes drooping from the day. Nora joined Caleb at the wheel, the silence between them comfortable, heavy with possibility. He reached for her hand, his fingers threading through hers, and she didn't pull away. "I meant it," she said, her voice low. "What I said yesterday. We're in this together." He squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "I don't deserve it, Nora. But I'm not strong enough to say no. You don't have to be." She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, and they stood there, the sea stretching endless around them, a fragile peace holding them together. The peace shattered when they returned to the dock. Victor was waiting, leaning against a piling, his coat pristine despite the day's damp. Two men flanked him, their faces hard, their hands in their pockets. Caleb killed the engine, his body tensing beside Nora. "Stay with Lila," he muttered, stepping onto the deck. She nodded, pulling the sleepy girl close, her pulse racing. Victor's smile was cold, predatory. "Nice boat, Wilder. Family outing. What do you want?" Caleb's voice was steel, but Nora saw the tremor in his hands. "Time's up." Victor tossed a cigarette into the water, watching it hiss. "You've got till tomorrow night. 10 grand, or we take something else." Caleb's jaw clenched. "I told you, I'm working on it. Work faster." Victor's eyes slid to Nora and Lila, lingering too long. Wouldn't want to upset the kid. Nora's grip tightened on Lila, who stirred but didn't wake. Caleb stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Leave them out of this. Then pay up." Victor straightened, his men closing in. "Or we'll collect our way." One of the men grabbed Caleb's arm, twisting it behind his back. Nora lunged forward, but Caleb shook his head, sharp and desperate. "Nora, don't." Victor laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and nodded to his men. They released Caleb, shoving him against the boat, and walked away, their footsteps echoing on the dock. Caleb slumped, breathing hard, a bruise blooming on his cheek. Nora rushed to him, her hands on his face, checking the damage. "Are you okay?" "Fine," he said, though his voice shook. He pulled away, shame flickering in his eyes. "I'm sorry you saw that. Don't be." She grabbed his hand, fierce and steady. "Tell me everything." "No." He hesitated, then nodded, the fight draining out of him. They sat on the deck, Lila asleep beside them, and he spoke low, halting, the truth spilling out like blood. "It's worse than I said," he admitted, staring at the water. "Dad's debt was 50 grand when he died. I've been paying it down bit by bit, but the interest, they keep jacking it up. 10's what I owe tomorrow, but there's more. Always more. They owe me, Nora." She swallowed, her mind racing. "How much total?" 30, maybe 40 now. I don't even know anymore." He rubbed his face, exhaustion carving lines into his skin. "I've been fishing extra runs, selling what I can, but it's not enough. Never enough." She took his hand, her resolve hardening. "We'll find a way. Sell the bookstore, my mom's house, something." "No." His voice was firm, almost angry. "I'm not dragging you into this." "You don't get to decide that," she shot back, echoing her words from the rain. "I'm already in, Caleb. For you. For Lila." He looked at her, torn between gratitude and fear, and pulled her close, his arms tight around her. "I don't know how to fix this," he whispered into her hair. "We'll figure it out," she said, holding him just as tight. Together. The sea rolled beneath them, dark and restless, and Nora knew the clock was ticking. But for now, they had the boat, the night, each other, and she'd fight to keep it, no matter what came next. The edge of the deep. The bookstore was a mess of boxes and dust, its shelves half empty by noon. Nora moved with purpose, stacking books into piles, keepers, sellers, giveaways, her hands steady despite the ache in her chest. Caleb worked beside her, hauling crates to the truck outside, his silence heavy with the weight of their plan. They'd agreed to sell what they could. Her mother's house was too big a move this fast, but the bookstore's inventory, the furniture, even the tide if it came to it, anything to scrape together for the 10,000 due by midnight. Lila sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting paperbacks, her brow furrowed in a way that made her look older than 10. She'd been quiet since the dock, her usual chatter replaced by a watchful stillness Nora couldn't ignore. "These ones are beat up," Lila said, holding up a stack of mysteries, their covers creased and torn. "Nobody'll buy 'em. Some people like the worn ones," Nora replied, forcing a smile. "Means they've been loved." Lila nodded, but her eyes flicked to her father, then back to the books. "Are we moving?" Caleb froze mid-step, a box in his arms. "What?" "You're packing stuff. Gran's house is small, so I thought." She trailed off, picking at a frayed corner. Nora exchanged a glance with Caleb, her stomach twisting. They hadn't told Lila the truth. Not the debt, not Victor, not the deadline ticking down. But she was too smart, too observant, and the lie they'd spun about fixing up the shop was fraying at the edges. "No, kiddo," Caleb said, setting the box down. "Just a clearing space. Making things better." Lila didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. She went back to sorting, her small hands methodical, and Nora felt a pang of guilt. This wasn't just their fight anymore. It was hers too, whether they wanted it or not. By afternoon, they'd loaded the truck with enough to fetch a few thousand old hardcovers, a display case, a chair Nora's mother had loved. Caleb called a guy in Portland, a second-hand dealer who'd take it all, no questions asked. It wasn't enough, not even close, but it was a start. "We've got 6 hours," Nora said, wiping sweat from her brow as they locked the shop. "What else?" Caleb rubbed his neck, his eyes distant. "There's a run I could make. Offshore past the shoals. Guys out there pay cash for fresh catch, no paperwork." Nora frowned. "In the tide? She's not built for that." "She'll hold." His voice was firm, but she saw the doubt flicker in his eyes. "I've done it before. Risky, but it could get us 5, maybe 6 grand." She didn't like it. The sea was restless today, waves crashing white against the breakwater, and the tide was patched, not proven. But the clock was relentless, and Victor's threat echoed in her ears. "Okay," she said finally. "But I'm coming with you." "No." He shook his head, sharp and stubborn. "It's too dangerous. And sitting here waiting isn't." She stepped closer, her voice low. "We're in this together, remember?" He stared at her, torn, then sighed. "Fine. But Lila stays with Gran." The sea was a beast, churning dark and wild as the tide cut through it. Nora clung to the rail, the spray stinging her face, her stomach lurching with every pitch. Caleb stood at the wheel, his jaw set, his hands white-knuckled. The engine groaned, louder than it should have, but he didn't flinch, his focus on the horizon. They'd left Lila with Caleb's mother, a stern woman with gray hair and kind eyes, who'd hugged Nora like she was family. "Take care of him," she whispered, and Nora had nodded, the promise settling heavy on her shoulders. "How far?" Nora shouted over the wind, her hair whipping around her face. "Another mile," Caleb called back. "There's a boat out there. Asterisk the Marlin Star. They'll buy what I've got." The hold held a dozen crates of lobster and cod, caught of the past week, stashed for a moment like this. It wasn't legal, not strictly, but Nora didn't care. Rules didn't matter when survival was on the line. The waves grew sharper, slamming the tide side to side, and Nora felt the deck shudder beneath her. "She's taking a beating," she said, gripping a rope to steady herself. "She'll hold," Caleb repeated, but his voice was tighter now, less sure. They spotted the Marlin 15 minutes later, a hulking trawler anchored against the swell. Its crew waved them in, rough men with windburned faces, and Caleb maneuvered the tide alongside, the boats knocking together in the chop. Nora helped toss lines, securing them, and the deal began, quick, no-nonsense cash stuffed into a waterproof bag. 6,000, the captain said, counting bills into Caleb's hand. "Good haul." Caleb nodded, pocketing the money. "Appreciate it." They were untying the lines when it happened. A rogue wave, taller than the rest, crashed over the tide's bow, flooding the deck. Nora stumbled, her boots slipping, and Caleb grabbed her, pulling her back before she went over. The engine sputtered, then died, the boat rocking helplessly in the swell. "Damn it," Caleb muttered, rushing to the controls. He turned the key, but nothing, just a weak whine. Starters flooded. Nora's heart sank. "Can you fix it?" "Not here." He wiped water from his face, scanning the horizon. The Marlin was already pulling away, its crew uninterested in their trouble. "We're dead in the water." The sea roared around them, relentless, and Nora felt the first stab of real fear. They were miles out, no radio. Caleb had sold it last year to make a payment, and the shore was a faint smudge in the dusk. She grabbed his arm, steadying herself as much as him. "What now?" He didn't answer, his eyes on the engine hatch. He yanked it open, tools clattering as he dug in, hands moving fast despite the cold. Nora held a flashlight, her teeth chattering, the beam shaking with every wave. Minutes stretched, the boat drifting farther, and she saw the strain in his face, the desperation. "Caleb," she said, her voice cutting through the wind. "Talk to me." "It's the fuel line," he said, not looking up. "Clogged or busted, I can't tell. If I can't fix it, we're stuck." She nodded, swallowing panic. "Tell me what to do." He glanced at her, surprised, then pointed to a wrench. "Hold this, tighten that bolt when I say." They worked together, her hands clumsy but willing, his sure despite the chaos. The sea battered them, water sloshing over the deck, but slowly, the engine coughed, then roared back to life. Caleb slumped against the rail, relief washing over him, and Nora laughed, shaky and raw. "We did it," she said, grabbing his hand. "Yeah," he breathed, pulling her close. "We did." The trip back was slow, the tide limping through the waves, but they made it, docking as the sky darkened to ink. Caleb counted the cash again, 6,000, plus the 4 from the bookstore sales. 10 grand, just enough. But the boat's damage gnawed at Nora, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. Victor was waiting at the dock, his SUV parked under a streetlight, his silhouette sharp against the glow. Caleb carried the money in a bag, his steps heavy, Nora beside him. Lila was still with Grand, safe for now, but the air crackled with tension. "You're cutting it close," Victor said, checking his watch. "Midnight's in 10. Here." Caleb tossed the bag at his feet, his voice flat. 10, like you said." Victor opened it, thumbing through the bills, then smiled, a slow, cruel thing. "Good boy. But you're short." Caleb stiffened. "What?" "Interest," Victor said, stepping closer. "Ran up today. Another 2 grand by Friday, or we start taking." Nora's blood ran cold. That wasn't the deal. Victor's eyes slid to her, amused. "Deals change, sweetheart. Ask your boyfriend, he knows how it works." Caleb lunged, but Nora grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Don't," she hissed, her heart pounding. "Not worth it." Victor chuckled, picking up the bag. "Smart girl. See you Friday, Wilder." He left, his men trailing, and Caleb sank to his knees, the fight draining out of him. Nora knelt beside him, her hands on his shoulders, feeling him tremble. "We got through tonight," she said, fierce and low. "We'll get through Friday." "How?" His voice was hollow, broken. "I've got nothing left, Nora. The boat's half dead, the shop's empty. We've got each other." She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "That's enough to start." He didn't argue, just leaned into her, his forehead against hers, and they stayed like that, the sea lapping at the dock, the night pressing in. Back at the house, Lila was waiting, curled on the couch with a book. She looked up as they entered, her eyes wide, too knowing. "You're wet," she said, sitting up. "What happened?" "Boat trouble," Caleb said, forcing a smile. "All fixed now." Lila didn't buy it. She crossed her arms, her voice small but firm. "You're lying. I heard Gran on the phone, something about money and bad people. Are we in trouble?" Nora's chest ached, and she saw the same pain in Caleb's eyes. He sat beside Lila, pulling her close. "Yeah, kiddo. A little. But we're handling it." "Who's we?" Lila asked, looking at Nora. "Us," Nora said, sitting on her other side. "All 3 of us." Lila nodded, leaning into her father, but her silence was heavy, a child's fear wrapped in trust. Nora met Caleb's gaze over her head, a silent vow passing between them. They'd protect her, no matter the cost. The clock struck midnight, and the sea outside whispered of debts unpaid, pulling them closer to the edge. Ashes on the wind. The morning after the sea run, Havenport woke to a stillness that felt like a held breath. The air was crisp, the harbor calm, but Nora felt the tension coiling tighter, a wire about to snap. Caleb hadn't slept. She found him on the porch at dawn, staring at the water, his hands restless. Lila was still with Gran, safe for now, but the clock was merciless. Friday loomed 2 days away, and the 2,000 Victor demanded was a mountain they couldn't climb. "We can't keep doing this," Nora said, joining him outside, a blanket around her shoulders. Scraping by, waiting for the next hit. Caleb didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the tide, moored and battered from yesterday's run. "I know. I've got 1 play left." She sat beside him, the wood creaking under her weight. "What?" "Victor." His voice was low, resolute. "I go to him face to face. Offer something he can't refuse." Nora's stomach dropped. "Like what?" "Me." He turned to her then, his eyes dark, steady. "I work for them, full-time, no more payments. Fishing, running whatever they need. They leave you and Lila out of it." "No." She grabbed his arm, her voice sharp. "You're not theirs to take, Caleb. I've been there since Dad died." He pulled free, standing, his shadow long in the morning light. "This ends it, Nora. One way or another." She stood too, stepping in front of him, her heart pounding. "And what happens when they don't let you go? When they use Lila against you?" You think they'll just shake your hand and call it square? He flinched, but his jaw set. I don't have anything else. The boat's shot, the shop's empty. This is all I've got left to give. Then we run, she said, desperate. Take Lila, go south, start over. They'd find us. He cut her off, his voice hard but his eyes soft, pleading. You know they would. I can't risk her. Or you. She stared at him, tears burning her eyes, and saw the truth he'd already decided. This wasn't a plan. It was a surrender. Don't do this, she whispered. Please. He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing her cheeks, and kissed her slow, deep, a goodbye she felt in her bones. I have to, he said against her lips. For you. She clung to him, her hands fisting in his shirt, but he pulled away, stepping back into the house. She followed, helpless, watching him grab his jacket, his keys, the envelope from Victor's last visit. He didn't look at her as he left, the door slamming shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Nora spent the day in a haze, pacing the bookstore, sorting books she'd never sell. She called Gran, checked on Lila, safe, drawing, oblivious for now, and tried to breathe through the panic clawing her chest. Caleb didn't answer his phone, didn't text, and every hour that passed tightened the knot in her gut. By dusk, she couldn't wait anymore. She drove to the docks, her mother's old sedan rattling over the gravel, and found the tide still moored, untouched. No Caleb, no Victor, just the sea lapping quiet and cold. She sat on the bench where they'd shared coffee, her hands trembling, and prayed he'd come back. He did, just as the stars blinked on, his truck rumbling into the lot. She ran to him as he stepped out, relief flooding her until she saw his face, pale, bruised, a cut above his eye dripping blood. Jesus, Caleb, she reached for him, but he held up a hand, stopping her. It's done, he said, his voice raw. They took the deal. She froze, searching his eyes. What deal? Me for you and Lila. I work their runs, smuggling, mostly out past the border. They leave you alone. Debt's cleared. He wiped blood from his lip, wincing. Had to convince him I was serious. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the bench, pulling him down with her. They did this to you? Part of the convincing. He tried to smile, but it cracked, and she saw the fear beneath it. I'm okay, Nora. It's over. It's not over, she snapped, anger surging past the relief. You're theirs now. How's that better? It's better because you're safe. He took her hands, his grip tight, desperate. Lila's safe. That's all that matters. She shook her head, tears spilling over. You matter, you idiot. To me. To her. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, and she buried her face in his chest, feeling his heartbeat fast and unsteady. I love you, he whispered, the words rough, like they'd been trapped too long. Always have. She looked up, her breath hitching, and kissed him, fierce, hungry, tasting salt and blood. I love you too, she said against his mouth, the confession breaking her open. Don't leave me again. He didn't promise, just held her tighter, and they stayed there, tangled in each other, the sea whispering around them. The night was theirs, a stolen moment before the tide turned. They went to Gran's together, picked up Lila, who ran at Caleb despite the bruises, hugging him like she'd known he was gone too long. Gran's eyes narrowed, but she didn't ask, just handed Nora a thermos of tea and a look that said, fix this. Back at the house, Lila fell asleep on the couch, her lion drawing clutched in her hand. Nora and Caleb sat on the porch, the thermos between them, the quiet heavy with everything unsaid. Tomorrow, he said finally, staring at the stars. They want me on a run. Canada border, some drop-off. Said it's the first of many. Nora's chest tightened. And if you don't go, they'll come for us. He took her hand, his thumb tracing her palm. I don't have a choice. She nodded, swallowing the protest, and leaned into him. Then tonight's ours. They went inside, careful not to wake Lila, and climbed the stairs to her old room. The bed was narrow, the mattress creaking, but it didn't matter. They shed their clothes, slow and reverent, hands mapping scars and years apart. It wasn't rushed, wasn't desperate like the rain. It was a claiming, a memorizing, every touch a promise they couldn't keep. After, they lay tangled in the sheets, her head on his chest, his fingers in her hair. If I could have stayed, he murmured, that summer I would have married you. Built a life. She pressed a kiss to his skin, tears slipping free. We'd have been happy. Yeah, he said, his voice breaking. We would have. Sleep took them, fragile and fleeting, the last calm before the storm. Morning came too soon, gray and cold. Caleb was up first, dressing in silence, his movements mechanical. Nora watched from the bed, memorizing him. The curve of his shoulders, the way his hands flexed, the bruise darkening his jaw. Don't go, she said, one last plea, knowing it was useless. He knelt beside her, kissing her forehead, her lips, lingering like he could take her with him. I'll come back, he said, a lie they both wanted to believe. Lila woke as he reached the door, her voice sleepy but sharp. Daddy. He turned, scooping her up, holding her tight. Be good for Nora, okay? I'll see you soon. She nodded, clinging to him, and Nora saw the tears in his eyes as he set her down. He left without looking back, the truck's engine fading into the dawn. Hours passed, then a day, then two. Friday came and went. The deadline Victor had set, but Caleb didn't return. Nora kept busy, cleaning the house, reading to Lila, calling Gran, but the silence gnawed at her, a growing dread she couldn't shake. Saturday night, the knock came. She opened the door, expecting him, but it was a fisherman she vaguely knew. Pete, grizzled and solemn, his hat in his hands. Nora, he said, his voice rough. They found the tide, wrecked off the border. No sign of Caleb. Her world tilted, the air sucked from her lungs. What? Coast Guard's looking, but there was blood on the deck. A lot. Looks like trouble. Maybe a fight, maybe worse. Pete shifted, uneasy. I'm sorry. Lila appeared behind her, small and silent, and Nora pulled her close, shielding her from the words. Thank you, she managed, closing the door, her legs giving out as she sank to the floor. Lila's arms wrapped around her, trembling. He's coming back, right? Nora held her tighter, tears streaming down her face. Yes, sweetheart, she lied, her voice breaking. He's coming back. But she knew he was gone. The syndicate, the run, the sea. It had taken him, just as it had taken her uncle, his father, all the men who dared to fight its pull. She saw it in her mind. Caleb standing on the tide, facing Victor or his men, choosing her and Lila over himself, the blood staining the deck as the waves swallowed him whole. Days later, they held a memorial, a small crowd on the cliff, the wind carrying ashes over the water. Nora stood with Lila, the wooden box empty now, its secrets burned with Margaret's letters. Gran wept quietly, but Lila didn't. She held Nora's hand, her face set, a strength beyond her years. That night, Nora found a note in Caleb's jacket, tucked in the pocket, a scrap of paper, his handwriting shaky but clear, asterisk Nora, Lila, my heart, my home. I'd do it all again. Asterisk. She pressed it to her lips, sobbing into the silence, and vowed to keep going, for Lila, for him, for the love that had burned too bright to last. The sea rolled on, relentless, carrying their ashes away.